The first sign is not a flood, it is a sound. At exactly midnight, somewhere in Antarctica, a silence that has existed for 14 million years simply stops. No creak, no groan, just gone. The ice sheet that covers an entire continent, 2 miles thick in places, begins to melt at a rate that physics has never permitted. And it will not stop for 24 hours. Nobody notices at midnight. They are asleep. At 3 a.m., coastal tide gauges start reading numbers they were never calibrated to handle. The engineers monitoring them assume sensor failure. They send a maintenance flag and go back to their coffee. By 6 a.m., the sea has risen roughly 20 feet. Not in a wave, not in a storm surge. Just steadily, quietly, the way a bathtub fills when you leave the tap running and walk away. Here's what the easy version of this scenario gets wrong. People imagine a wall of water, a disaster movie moment. The reality is stranger and slower and somehow more unsettling. The ocean just keeps being slightly higher than it was an hour ago. Miami's lowest streets are not flooded. They are submerged. There is no drama in it. The water is flat and still and extraordinarily calm. It simply occupies space that used to be a parking lot, then a street, then a ground floor. The first system that actually breaks is not infrastructure. It is insurance software. Flood risk models are built around historical data, storm return periods, 100-year scenarios. By 7 a.m., every coastal risk algorithm and every underwriting system in the world is trying to calculate premiums for events it was never designed to contemplate. Systems start throwing errors. Brokers start getting calls they cannot answer. Reinsurance desks go quiet in a way that means everyone is doing the same math and nobody likes the result. Meanwhile, the melt is not just coming from Antarctica. Greenland's ice sheet, the size of Alaska and nearly 2 miles deep at its center, is going at the same rate. So is every glacier in the Alps, the Himalayas, the Andes, the Rockies. Every frozen thing on Earth is becoming water simultaneously. Rivers that are usually fed by glacial melt over entire summers are receiving that entire contribution in a single morning. The Rhine, the Ganges, the Colorado, the Mekong. Every one of them is rising faster than their banks were ever built to hold. The second system that breaks is food. Not because crops flood immediately, though many do by afternoon. Because the cold storage and shipping networks that move perishables across continents are quietly built on the assumption that refrigeration is a backup system, not the primary one. When port infrastructure in Hamburg and Houston and Shanghai starts taking on water, the refrigerated containers sitting on those docks are not the priority. Nobody is organizing a rescue operation for frozen chicken. By noon, sea levels have risen somewhere between 50 and 60 feet. The exact number depends on rules we are setting for this scenario. Whether all permafrost counts, whether all sea ice counts, but the general shape is this. London's Thames Barrier is not a barrier anymore. It is a submerged metal structure. Bangladesh, which sits on a river delta barely above sea level to begin with, is largely gone by mid-morning. Florida, below Orlando, is ocean. The Netherlands, which spent centuries engineering its way above water, has spent those centuries below where the water now sits. Here is the part nobody talks about when they discuss sea level rise. Fresh water. All of that ice was fresh. The ocean is salt. In 24 hours, the salinity of every coastal water body on Earth drops measurably. The ecosystems that evolved over millions of years around specific salt concentrations, every coral reef, every estuary, every spawning ground, are suddenly living in a different ocean. They cannot adapt in 24 hours. They cannot adapt in 24 years. The fish that feed coastal populations, the fisheries that feed 1 billion people, are entering conditions they have never encountered. The world's drinking water systems are also, paradoxically, at risk of shortage. Because the aquifers and river systems that supply fresh water to inland cities are now competing with floodwater that is moving in reverse. Saltwater intrusion pushing into river mouths, groundwater systems under coastal cities experiencing pressure from the rising water table in ways they were never designed for. The pipes still work. The water that comes out of them is beginning to taste strange. By late afternoon, the melt is nearly complete. Sea levels have risen somewhere in the range of 216 feet, the number that gets cited in the long version of the real science. Every coastal city in human history was built with a relationship to the sea. That relationship has just been renegotiated entirely. New York is a set of islands with the tops of skyscrapers visible. Shanghai is memory. Mumbai is gone below the middle floors. Most of human civilization, which organized itself around coastlines for 10,000 years, because coastlines meant trade, food, and water, has organized itself into the wrong place. Inland cities are suddenly the most valuable places on Earth. Denver, Nairobi, Chengdu, landlocked places that were considered peripheral, are now the stable ground. Here is the contrarian part. Some of this new world is not immediately worse for everyone. The Sahara, the Middle East, North Africa, regions where glacial contribution to rivers was already minimal, are relatively unchanged in their immediate circumstances. The Arctic, freed of its ice, opens shipping routes that rearrange global trade in ways that took a century to imagine happening gradually and have now simply happened. The countries that were always cold, always inland, always high, they are, by the brutal logic of this scenario, better positioned than they were yesterday. The survivors of coastal civilization are not dead, they are displaced. Several billion people need somewhere else to be, very quickly, with whatever they carried up to higher ground. The largest migration in human history, compressed into a single afternoon. What the scenario reveals is something the normal version of sea level rise discussion tends to avoid. We did not build civilization where the planet is stable. We built it where the planet was convenient. The coast was the interface between land and sea, which meant it was the interface between everything. Food from the ocean, trade across the water, rivers meeting the sea. The coast was the hinge of human organization. Remove the ice, not slowly, not over centuries in a way that permits adaptation, but in a single day, and what you see is not just a natural disaster. You see the shape of the bet humanity made when it decided where to build everything. The water does not cover the world. It covers the choice.